Humanity loves to fight. From the moment people formed groups, conflict wasn't far behind. Even before nations existed, wars raged over land, power, and identity. From swords and shields to cannons, tanks, and now drones striking from half a world away. The weapons change, but violence never stops. So what keeps pulling us back into fights? And is peace even possible? Today on the Infographic Show, we'll reveal why the world will always be at war. For ancient empires, war wasn't a choice, it was a reality. Rome didn't expand its borders with diplomacy, it conquered through centuries of systemic warfare. The Mongol Empire at its height ruled over 16% of Earth's land and a quarter of its population, all gained by military conquest. And Alexander the Great spent nearly his entire adult life at war, carving out an empire that stretched from Greece to India. Even in the supposedly more civilized modern era, the cycle continued. Out of the past 3,400 years, humanity has only managed about 268 years without war, less than 8% of recorded time. And even then, people kept trying to lock down peace, signing more than 8,000 treaties before 1932 alone. The 20th century is often remembered as the age of enlightenment and international law, yet it became the bloodiest era in human history. 2 world wars killed over 100 million people. The Cold War that followed spawned dozens of proxy wars, leaving entire regions locked in cycles of violence. The Middle East has been at war almost non-stop since the 1940s. Africa saw over 80 coups between 1960 and 2000, and another dozen in just the past 2 decades. Since World War II, even through the Cold War, the world's major powers have avoided direct warfare, largely thanks to nuclear deterrence. But that hasn't stopped conflict elsewhere. There have been more than 150 armed wars, from Korea to Vietnam to Afghanistan, Iraq, and most recently Ukraine. Peace has always been the exception, not the rule. Even though warfare has changed over the years, its causes have stayed the same. The first and most persistent is competition for resources. Throughout history, nations have gone to war when they believed their survival or prosperity depended on taking what others had. This is only intensified as the global population exploded from 1 billion in 1800 to over 8 billion today. That is 8 times more people competing for the same resources. Water is the most basic human need. The Organization for Economic and Cooperative Development estimates that by 2050, water demand will increase by 55%. Meanwhile, climate change is pushing supplies to the breaking point. There are already disputes over water rights all around the world. India and Pakistan clash over the Indus River. Turkey, Syria, and Iraq fight over the Euphrates Tigris. Ethiopia, Sudan, and Egypt argue over the Nile. And even in the US, 7 states are battling over the shrinking Colorado River. Today's disputes might be settled peacefully, but history tells a different story. Nations often drew borders along vital rivers, using them as natural defenses while securing access to fresh water and fish. Energy resources spark even more conflicts. Fuel has to be extracted, refined, transported, and burned. And at every step, there's room for disputes, territorial claims, and war. Russia claimed its 2022 invasion of Ukraine was about politics and NATO expansion. But beneath the surface lies another motive: Ukraine's massive reserves of natural gas and minerals. One reason Europe hasn't cut all ties with Russia, even 3 years into the war, is energy. Russia remains one of the world's biggest exporters of oil and natural gas, and some European countries are actually spending more on Russian fuel than they are giving Ukraine in aid and weapons. And this is just one of the most recent and most visible examples of the fight for natural resources. China's aggressive claims in the South China Sea aren't really about defense against the West, they're about oil and gas. The contested waters hold rich deposits, but extraction is nearly impossible, while multiple countries fight over ownership. China has also been accused of illegally drilling in Taiwan's waters. All this, even though China already imports massive amounts of energy and props up Russia's war machine with discounted oil. Even the US isn't above resource wars. It has plenty of oil at home, yet still fought multiple wars in the Middle East, the region with 2/3 of global reserves. Some accuse the US of siphoning oil to power its own war machine. In Syria alone, that could be worth $115 billion over 12 years. Washington, for its parts, claimed it was securing those fields so ISIS couldn't use them. There's another factor for the war in Ukraine: minerals. Everyday life and technology rely heavy on elements such as lithium, iron, titanium, uranium, manganese, and even graphite. And Ukraine has been estimated to have 5% of the world's supply of rare earth minerals. It has the biggest potential for lithium extraction in the region, the largest uranium deposit in Europe, the sixth largest iron ore extraction industry, and much more. These resources are so important to both Russia and the US that even the signing of an extraction deal wasn't enough for Washington to step in and stop the war. China is also another huge player in the scramble for rare minerals. It controls 60% of all production and up to 80% of all processing capacity in the entire world. It allows it to basically control which nation gets access to resources at what prices. When the US slapped trade tariffs on the rest of the world, China struck back, cutting off its mineral exports to America. That move forced Washington to roll back some tariffs, turning the standoff into a bluffing game over which side would fold first. Some resources guarantee conflict. They're vital for new technologies, which makes them vital for new weapons. And once weapons become reliant on them, every nation wants more. In the end, a war over resources is almost unavoidable. Resources aren't the only reason wars never stop. Some of history's deadliest battles were fought over nothing more than ideas. Religious wars dominated Europe for centuries, from the Crusades to the 30 Years' War that killed a third of Central Europe's population. The Protestant Reformation divided nations and sparked conflicts that raged for generations. Today, sectarian violence between Sunni and Shia Muslims continues to destabilize the Middle East. Meanwhile, Hindu-Muslim tensions still erupt into violence across South Asia. Even in nations that call themselves secular, religion still plays a role, often mixing with immigration and crime debates. Sweden, for example, has been called the crime capital of Europe, and even the so-called War on Terror carried strong religious undertones. Nationalism can prove to be equally destructive. The idea that each ethnic group deserves its own country has sparked endless bloodshed. Yugoslavia's collapse in the 1990s proved how quickly neighbors can become enemies. And in places like Syria, Iraq, and Afghanistan, ethnic and national groups are still fighting over the same ground. And the global struggle between democracy and authoritarianism continues to play out through proxy wars everywhere. Research published in the American Journal of Science shows that once a country locks into either system, it becomes more stable and less likely to start wars itself. The problem comes when those two systems meet at the same border. That's when the sparks fly. And that's why the Cold War never went hot. Instead of direct conflict between the US and the Soviet Union, they fought through proxies in Korea, Vietnam, Angola, Afghanistan, and every frontier where their worlds collided. One major driver of large-scale wars is the security dilemma. When one nation builds up its military to feel safer, its neighbors see a threat and start to expand their own forces. The result is an arms race where everyone spends more on defense but ends up feeling less secure. The security dilemma explains why nuclear weapons, meant to make war unthinkable, have fueled more conflict and instability. What began with just 2 nuclear powers has grown to 9, with more nations eager to join this exclusive club. Each new nuclear state raises a risk. Weapons could fall into the wrong hands or just be used in a regional crisis that spirals out of control. Some nations, like China, are overcompensating, planning to double their nuclear arsenal between 2020 and 2030. China's military buildup shows how the security dilemma works. As Beijing expands its navy and missile forces, the US responds by boosting its Pacific presence and tightening alliances with Japan, Australia, and South Korea. China sees this as a hostile act and doubles down on its own buildup. Neither side wants war, but their preparations make it more likely. China has also looked at the weapons and equipment the US has at its disposal and decided that it needs to counter them. And that's why some satellite imagery showed test sites with mock US ships being targeted by anti-ship missiles deep in China's territory. Modern technology has made the security dilemma even more dangerous. Cyber attacks can cripple a nation's infrastructure in minutes, creating pressure for preemptive digital strikes. Undersea cables now carry the world's internet and data, giving submarines and sea drones huge leverage over the deep ocean. Artificial intelligence and autonomous weapons could make war faster and less predictable than ever before. We're already seeing this in Ukraine, which has become a major drone producer despite its limited economy. And space is the newest battlefield as nations race to develop anti-satellite weapons that could blind enemy forces. Even if you ignore culture, nationality, or technology, some wars come down to demographics. Countries with large populations of young adults, usually defined as ages 15 to 29, are far more likely to experience civil wars and international conflicts. Research by a Washington-based private advocacy group shows that countries with significant youth bulges are the most prone to international conflict. States with older populations are the most peaceful, and the numbers tell the story. Out of 67 countries with major youth bulges, 60 are dealing with serious unrest or violence. Young populations bring pressures that older societies just don't face. When large groups of young people enter the job market simultaneously, they might find a lack of employment opportunities. This trend is driven by older adults staying healthier and more productive, so they don't retire as early. On top of that, wages haven't kept up with the cost of living. Many older people can't save enough, so they keep working well into their later years. Rapid urbanization makes the problem worse. Young workers leave rural areas and flood into cities that can't provide enough jobs or housing. Inequality grows, resentment festers, and street violence turns into political conflict. Eventually, the chaos inside one country spreads across its borders. The youth bulge isn't random, it follows a pattern. As nations industrialize, death rates fall first, while birth rates stay high. The result is exploding youth populations with no systems to absorb them. And history shows what happens next: revolutions. England in the 1600s, France in the 1700s, even the Balkans before the World Wars. Dig deeper into the youth bulge and you'll find another trigger: inequality. It's not just rich versus poor, but horizontal inequality, where whole groups defined by culture or religion get left behind. These group-based inequalities are dangerous. When entire ethnic or religious communities feel collectively deprived, they become breeding grounds for organized crime and violence, which quickly spills out into politics. Even with all the suffering wars bring, they have also been profitable, at least for those in the right place at the right time. Today, the military-industrial complex is a vast network linking defense contractors, political leaders, and military institutions. Together, they create a system of mutual reliance, one that leans toward higher military spending and sometimes military action itself. The numbers show just how massive these interests are. Global military spending hit $2.7 trillion in 2024, the highest share of the world economy since the Cold War. The U.S. leads by far, outspending almost every other major power combined. Arms sales are just as extreme, $175 billion in U.S. exports in 2020, and American companies control nearly 60% of the global defense market. The U.S. military-industrial complex has become a self-funding machine, generating steady income for some of the country's biggest companies. In turn, those companies shape national policies, giving themselves even more leverage. A feedback loop that never ends. Online forums often joke that America is 3 corporations in a trench coat. Whether or not that's true, it is clear the defense industry houses some of the most powerful players driving U.S. policy. Campaign contributions make the incentives obvious. On average, Armed Services Committee members who voted to raise defense spending got $151,000 from defense companies. Those who voted against increases, just $43,000. The U.S. isn't unique here. Other countries are headed down the same path. And the logic is the same. More weapons means more industry. More industry means more profits. And those profits flow straight into politics, making the system almost impossible to dismantle. Military-industrial complexes everywhere profit most when wars actually happen, because what good are weapons if they're never used? This creates a larger paradox that over time war itself becomes profitable. The post-World War II boom shows this clearly. U.S. GDP jumped from $228 billion in 1945 to $1.7 trillion by 1975. Wartime production had built the foundation for decades of growth. Even countries shattered by the war, Japan, West Germany, and France, saw economic recoveries in the years that followed. Research shows that longer, more severe wars can actually boost post-war growth. A 10% increase in war duration leads to a 2.1 increase in average growth afterward. The reason is simple. War speeds up innovation, reshapes industries, and forces social change, shifts that fuel the economy even after the guns fall silent. But war always comes with a price. The Iraq War had cost $860 billion by 2009, money that could have gone to schools, hospitals, or other infrastructure. It might have fueled decades of growth, or it might have widened global inequality, dragging society back into the same struggles over resources and power. But there's another, slightly newer factor that has caused a new category of conflict: climate change. The roots of climate change trace back to the Industrial Revolution. Cities grew, productivity soared, and the hunger for new resources exploded. Rare earth metals, coal, oil, things that societies barely touched suddenly became essential. For 200 years, industry reshaped the planet without regard for the cost. Now those changes are coming back to haunt us. Water scarcity already affects 2 billion people worldwide. and climate change will only make it worse, intensifying droughts and shifting rainfall patterns. The Nile River dispute over Ethiopia's Grand Renaissance Dam shows how water infrastructure can turn into an international issue overnight. And some resource struggles exist because they're man-made, the result of pollution and over-extraction. Climate migration might be the ultimate driver of future conflict. The UN estimates that up to 1 billion people could be displaced by 2050. That would cause refugee flows on a scale the world has never seen, reshaping the cultural and religious makeup of even the most stable nations. And history shows what happens. Countries rarely want to absorb millions of outsiders out of fear they will never leave. But the difference with climate change is that these displacements could be permanent. But beneath all the strategies lies something deeper: human nature itself. In the past, loyalty to your group and fighting outsiders meant survival. But in a world of nuclear weapons and global interdependence, these same instincts could be catastrophic. Political leaders understand and exploit those tendencies. Authoritarian rulers from Hitler to Russian President Vladimir Putin have risen to power by identifying enemies and promising to defend the nation against them. Even democracies find that rallying against foreign threats unites fractured populations and distracts from domestic problems. The psychology of war also shapes individual choices. Soldiers don't fight only for political goals, they fight for the people beside them. Populations rally behind wars when they believe their group is under attack. Even if the threat is small, emotions beat reason when it comes to war. The uncomfortable truth is that war persists because it sometimes works. Nations that use force can gain land, resources, or security. And when those are threatened, war becomes the fallback. The world may always be at war, but right now every nation is gearing up for a fight they can't even afford. Watch why every country is preparing for a war they can't afford to see what's driving the buildup, or click on this video instead.